Welcome to the demonstration of the building of a computer in Mr. Thomas's DMPT 1055 class. We're going to start off with a table build like what we did at the midterm time, and we're going to end with connecting our leads from our computer case to our headers on our motherboard. This will be the complete computer build, so if you can do this, I know that you can build a computer all by yourself, boys and girls. So we're going to go ahead and start, Mr. Ben here. Let's start with the let's start with the processor. And now we're going to look at the processor. This is the processor, and if you look at the processor, you'll see a triangle in one of the corners on the back of the processor. So that's the bottom. Let's go to the top, or the top, back, same thing. You'll see a triangle there. Where you got it? You pointed a triangle. Where is it? Right there. That's the triangle. That's basically a guide that tells you how to fit the processor into the socket on the motherboard. You should see a triangle on the socket as well, and it's right here where my finger is. Yeah, Ben has his finger on there. That triangle on the socket tells you exactly the direction. I want the two triangles to line up in order to be fitted properly. Then I'm gonna cover it up, to push down the cover, and I'm gonna pull back the lever and slide it in and fit it under the cover. Very good. Our processor is now fitted. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead, for the heck of it, let's just go ahead and put in our stock fan. That is the fan that came with the processor that cools off the processor so it doesn't get overheated. And like I said before, this fan has been through years of abuse from students. So we're just going to kind of demonstrate. You can see the feet there are kind of, messed up. So we're going to fit our feet into the 4 holes as Mr. Ben just demonstrated there. And how we would normally fit it in is we take our 2 thumbs and we press down on the opposing legs diagonally. So one there and like this, bam, those 2. We press until we hear a click, and then we do the other 2, press until we hear a click. We're not gonna hear any clicks because like I said, the fan is pretty beaten up pretty bad. Now when you place your fan on your motherboard, you notice that there's a power cable leading from the fan. Because of course the fan needs electricity, right? So we want to make sure that the power cable coming from the fan actually can reach the 4-pinned power connector on the motherboard. Now if you have to pull up the fan and kind of reorient it and kind of rotate it like that, bam, so it's closer and a little more convenient, that's okay. All right? Okay, we're going to go the lead from the fan, or the lead of the wires from the fan, is going to go into the header on the motherboard, because it's called the header if it's like a socket on the motherboard. It's called the lead if it's like a plug or a wire coming from another component. All right, so we have our stock fan in place, so our motherboard is going to be nice and cool. Now there's one thing that we didn't talk about here, we didn't demonstrate here, but if you were doing an actual build, you need to make sure that you put on your thermal paste. Your thermal paste would be a small pea-sized piece of PEA size piece of thermal paste that will go on top of your processor before you put your fan down on top of it. That thermal paste helps to dissipate heat from your processor, and it also makes sure that the processor and the fan stick together. All right, next, let's go ahead and do something else pretty easy. Let's go ahead and slot our RAM, okay? Now, the most important thing, you have 2 things you want to focus on when you slot your RAM, is you want to make sure that, let's see the teeth in the bottom of that RAM, our connectors at the bottom of our RAM. See how there's a gap in the teeth there? You want to make sure that that gap in the teeth, you want to make sure that you want to make sure that lines up with the DIMM slots on the motherboard where we have these little raised parts. So these raised parts will go in the gaps in the RAM. So the idea is the RAM will only correctly fit in one direction. So you should be able to see ahead of time exactly which orientation of the RAM will properly fit in the DIMM slot. And remember, you want to go red, red, or orange, orange. You don't want to mix colors, okay? Because we're going to have 2 sticks. And as Ben is demonstrating here as well, once he has it placed, he's going to use his 2 thumbs to press down on the ends of the ram sticks until the 2 pins pop up. You hear a nice popping sound. Those 2 pins, those retaining pins on either side of the ram, it pops up and lets you know that my ram is fully seated and I'm good to go. So he chose red, red. Very good. Now, let's do, what do you want to do next? Want to do your hard drives, or do you want to do your...
Is it easier to put this first in the mud?
Yes, that's very good. See, that was a trick question, but it wasn't really a trick question because I had totally forgotten that that's what we were doing. And that's this. What we want to do is, when we do a full build, we don't want to build up everything, like the power supply and the graphics card. We don't want to do all of that and then try to put it into the case. That would be extremely hard to do. The best thing for you to do is just to install the processor, the stock fan, and the RAM sticks, put the motherboard into the case, screw it down. I'm not going to screw it down today because this is not a permanent thing. We don't want to do it permanently, but I will show you where the screws go. And then finish with the building the components for our computer. So what we're going to do is we're going to just give you some space here, and we're going to fly in our case, and we're going to pretend like we're screwing in the motherboard on the bottom of the case. Now, if you look at these pegs, these pegs here that have the, they call them, they've been tapped. They've been screw tapped. So basically, you see the little screws, the little grooves for screws. Essentially, that means that a screw can screw into that hole, okay? So the idea is each one of those gold little stanchions or gold little cylinders should be behind one of the holes on the motherboard that's meant to drive a screw through. So if we look at the motherboard, we see we have these holes, and they're really easy to find because you see we have, you see we have those silver little, dashes around each hole, and there are a number of holes all over the motherboard. You're gonna have to carefully look at, when you do a build for real, make sure you look all over the motherboard to make sure that you know where all the holes are, how many you have, and make sure that they line up correctly with your retaining cylinders there at the on the bottom of the case. So let's go ahead and place it on the bottom of the case. Now, one thing as far as placement, an easy way to remember placement is, let's turn it around so we're seeing our input-output section of the motherboard, which is this section right here. That's how I plug stuff in, like a USB drive or a PS2 connector for my PS2 plug for my mouse or my keyboard. So as a result, that common sense should tell us that needs to be accessible or somewhere in the outer part of the case, so that when I close up the case, I can still plug stuff up to the motherboard. So you want to make sure that your input-output area coincides with the input-output opening in the back of the case. So that's the correct orientation. That'll tell you how you orient your motherboard in your case, okay? And after you orient to that direction, you want to make sure that your gold little pillars that are screw tapped line up with those holes in the motherboard. And if we had a Phillips head screwdriver, we would drive a screw into each one of those holes so that motherboard will be solidly attached to the bottom of the case. Outstanding. So after we do that, what do you want to do now? You want to do your...
The hard drive?
Let's do the hard drive. So we have 2 hard drives we're going to install. We have an SSD or solid state drive that you would install your operating system on, okay? And any programs that you wanted to install on the computer, you'd install it on your SSD. Remember, there are no moving parts. It's really fast. It's small, but it's very expensive and you don't have a lot of capacity. So we're only going to put the items that are very important on my SSD here. And I have another drive, my SATA drive, my SATA drive. Some people call it a mechanical drive. The reason why they call it a mechanical drive is because of the fact that there are actual moving parts inside of this larger drive. The SSD that Ben is holding, that's a 2.5-inch SSD. And the mechanical drive that he's holding is a 3.5-inch mechanical drive. As you can see, he has connected his data cables or SATA cables up to each drive, and you'll see could you do that for one more time? I don't know, maybe you got it already. But the idea is you want to make sure that you plug the SATA cables into the small L fitting on the back of the drive. So the small L is for data, and we're going to see the big L is going to be for power that's going to come from our power supply. So yes, both of them set up for data. Typically speaking, there are shelves in the case where I would slide and attach those drives into the case. We're not going to go through that part right now this time because we don't want this to be so permanent because you want to be able to take it apart and put it together multiple times. But the idea is I want to make sure those drives are secure and they're not going to float around inside of the case or damage the motherboard. Next, what Ben is going to do is he's going to plug my data cables from the back of my drives to the motherboard. And it's very easy to see exactly where I plug it in because I see those little L's, those little L-shaped ports on the motherboard, and it should be in a bank. In this particular case, there are a bank of orange ports. So it's really easy to find. I'm going to plug in my SSD, and I'm going to plug in my mechanical drive as well. Okay, so now I'm set for data. So that basically means the processor can talk to the SSD drive and the SSD solid state drive and the mechanical drive. However, neither one of these have power yet because everything needs electricity. These don't have power yet, and we're going to hook that up, I guess, later. We're going to do it now. We're going to do power supply now. We're going to do the motherboard. We're going to do the graphics card now.
The graphics card.
We're going to do the graphics card. As we know, the graphics card is responsible for placing an image on the screen, okay? And as you can see, there are two sides of it. There's a side that looks like a printed circuit board that's on the bottom, and there's another side on the top that is usually it's some sort of the side right here. The side right here. That's the side that actually has a component. You can see there's a back, and as you can see, Ben is holding it properly because of the fact that you'll see that there are inputs and outputs on, well, really just outputs on the back of this graphics card. Those are DVI graphics card. DVI interfaces or DVI ports. DVI stands for Digital Video Interface, and actually the second I stands for integrated. So that means you can carry a digital signal or the old-fashioned analog signal. And so what Ben is going to do is he's going to find the PCIe, the Peripheral Component Interconnect Express slot on the motherboard, which is usually the longest slot on the motherboard, and he's going to plug that GPU or that graphics card in. Notice that the outputs from the graphics card, that's where I'm going to plug my monitor into. Okay, so just like the outputs and inputs on the back of the motherboard, I need to have access to them outside of the case, so that'll tell me exactly how I'm supposed to orient this graphics card, GPU. Okay, so you want to press it all the way down into the PCIe slot until it's as far as you can go. You don't want to use too much force, but you want to be firm because you want to make sure you have a strong connection. And his is probably connected. Yeah, exactly. You see that we have a screw hole right here on the sleeve for the GPU where I would sink another screw right there into the case and that will connect the GPU to the case, making sure that it's solidly connected. We're not going to do that here, of course, because of the fact that we don't want this to be so permanent. So we have our graphics card seated, okay? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the big boy. We're going to get our power supply. Okay, now the power supply is what, of course, supplies electricity for everything inside of the case. This is a direct current or DC power supply. It has a certain amount of voltage, and if you look at the back of it, it should tell you the voltage that it can accommodate right here, or the voltage, I'm sorry, not the voltage, but the wattage, okay? Each component on the inside of your computer sucks up a certain amount of electricity. That electricity can be basically expressed in wattage or power or work that that component is doing. 530 watts is the full capacity or the max capacity of this DC power supply. So when I add up the power requirements of all my components on the inside, it has to be at or below, preferably below 530 watts. Okay, so what he's going to do is he's going to fit the power supply into the case, and the idea is on the back of the power supply you have your on-off switch and your fuse and your 3-prong connector that would connect to the wall, the AC supply from the wall. Because what this does, and this is like a transformer, it transforms the alternating current power that comes into our home to direct current, which is what the form of electricity that the components of the computer actually use. So as you can see, he put the power supply into the case and pushed it outwards. And essentially, if you look at the back of the power supply, you'll see that there's, I'm sorry, 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, as far as battery? Yeah. Okay, we'll get you some, we'll get you a adapter. We'll get you, plug you in, okay? You can see that we have holes, okay, on the case that accommodate screws to go through the outside of the case and into the power supply to keep the power supply in place, okay? Great, so we'll assume we sunk the screws. Screws are in place. Now, let's go ahead and see if we can, do you want to maybe do the power on the next
Yeah, let's
battery?
charge. Yeah,
Okay,
charge.
give me I'm gonna get a cutaway of Ben here. Cutaway of Ben, get it, that means a shot or two of him looking like he's working or something, because the idea is when I edit this together, I don't want to like stop it and then restart it. So what I'll do is that I will, when where we got to ends, I'll cut to his face, and then that's when underneath that I'll bring in what we're about to continue recording. So it'll be seamless. You'll never know that we stopped recording. Okay? So you got a couple of seconds of him.
That's another editing tips.
Yes, well, editing tips, absolutely. Okay, you
Yeah.
can pause it. The only thing we have left to do now is to connect the leads from the case to the headers on the motherboard, so that, you know, come on this side, you can show, so that when I press the power button on the case, okay, the computer will come on, because when I press this power button, it's going to activate the motherboard, right? It's going to activate the motherboard. So in order for it to do that, there must be some kind of connection between the case and the motherboard. That's what we're about to do right now. For power, for the reset button, for our HDD light, our hard drive light, a hard disk drive light that tells me when my hard drive is spinning, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to, first of all, let's take a look at the leads, and these are coming from the case, by the way, okay? Notice that we have one that's marked power SW, that stands for power switch, okay? The next one says reset SW, that's the reset switch. So when I press the smaller reset switch under the power switch on the case, I can reset the computer, or like reboot it without having to power down. And finally, we have the HDD lead there. That's basically going to connect the case to the motherboard so that when my hard drives are thinking, okay, and spinning, you'll see a little yellow or amber or red light on the case that'll kind of intermittently blink to let you know your hard drive is spinning, it's thinking about something. Okay, so the whole idea is to look for that black sleeve there on the motherboard. Okay, that's called my front panel
This
connector.
one right here?
It's yes, that one right here. That one right there. Okay? Now, in order to know what to plug into what, you definitely want to have your, your manual for your case and your manual for your motherboard handy, because it's what plugs in, how I connect to my front panel connector, my front panel header. That's what we call the black sleeve there, the front panel header. It's going to depend on the design of the case and the motherboard and how they fit together. Give me 1 second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, you can pause that.